You know, there's a curious thing that happens to certain people. They step into a room and they don't just see the furniture and hear the chatter, they feel the whole weather of the place. The unspoken tension between two friends, the small flinch beneath a practiced smile. And from early on we're told, this is a gift, aren't we? The knack for noticing what others miss. But today I'd like to suggest something more unsettling, that this very clarity, this capacity to see through, may be the most dangerous thing you'll ever carry. I'm not speaking of ordinary danger, not the sort that bruises skin or breaks bone. I'm speaking of something subtler and, in a way, more devastating. The peril of becoming so awake that you can no longer take part in the beautiful unconsciousness that lets most people live in relative peace. Have you ever truly watched people at a party? Really watched them? They're playing a game, you see. Everyone knows the rules without being taught. You ask, "How are you?" They reply, "Fine." And both parties agree to treat that as a complete answer. You compliment the host, you laugh at jokes that aren't particularly funny, you nod at stories you've already heard. It's a quiet pact to keep to the surface, to keep things pleasant, to avoid looking too deeply. And then there's you, the one who doesn't quite play. You notice the wife who recoils a fraction when her husband speaks. You sense the colleague who is desperately lonely in the middle of the crowd. You feel anxiety rippling through the room like an invisible current. Here is where the danger begins, because once you see, you cannot unsee. And more troubling still, your very presence becomes a kind of mirror, one that many people cannot bear to face. What do I mean by that? When you perceive the currents beneath social interaction, you draw attention silently to what everyone else has agreed to ignore. People rarely enjoy this, not because they are wicked or foolish, but because your precision threatens the very scaffolding that allows them to function. Think of society as a stage. Everyone has a role: the successful businessman, the devoted mother, the reliable friend. These are roles. You understand costumes we wear. The play works beautifully, so long as everyone stays in character. But you, with the penetrating gaze, are like an audience member who stands up mid-performance and declares, "That's just an actor." You can imagine how welcome that interruption is. The theater is constructed for a blessed forgetting for the pleasure of inhabiting the story as if it were the whole of reality. When your presence refuses to buy the illusion, lines begin to falter. The timing goes off. People become uncomfortable not because you are making a scene, but because you won't participate in the collective pretense. You won't purchase the mask. And therefore the mask shows its seams. Now, let us be generous to these masks. They are not necessarily malicious deceptions. They are the social oils, the small conventions by which the machinery of daily life hums along. A little politeness here, a "I'm fine" there, these things keep the gears from grinding. But clear seeing is different. It is not a switch you flick on and off. It is more like hearing. Once you can hear, it is difficult to choose not to. The body registers what the mind would prefer to pass over. A pause where there should be flow. A laugh an octave too high. A subject slipped past as deftly as a boat avoiding a whirlpool. At this level, truth isn't a doctrine. It is a physiological signal. There's no arguing with your own heartbeat. The danger, as I use the word, arises less from what you say than from what you can no longer collude with. You cannot laugh on cue merely to keep the rhythm going. You cannot nod through a story that drags a shadow behind it. You become a stillness in a noisy room, and it is exactly this stillness that unsettles the performance. The company doesn't know where to place you in the cast, and the natural reflex of a troupe is to coax you back into character or ease you off the stage. Do understand them. Games require players. Plays require actors who will inhabit their parts. In a moment of wakefulness, you have questioned the theater itself, so it is not surprising if you receive puzzled looks or the gentle reprimands. You're reading too much into things. You're too intense. Can't you just relax? They are not necessarily judging your soul. They are defending the structure that lets them breathe evenly. And here we come to the simplest truth of all. No one unknows what they have come to know, nor can you. Once you've seen the fine crack running through the painted wall, you cannot pretend it's merely part of the design. But to see with this degree of clarity carries a very particular cost, a cost we must name carefully in what follows. Before we condemn the party game or the theater of roles, we must understand why it exists at all. Human beings do not live on facts alone. We live inside climates of feeling. A family, an office, a city, they are like shared bodies with a nervous system that rises and falls together. When people keep to the surface, when they trade little courtesies and simple answers, they are not always lying. Often they are regulating the weather. The small pleasantries are like sandbags stacked along a riverbank in the rainy season. They do not stop the river from being a river, but they keep it from flooding the village every afternoon. Consider the way a child learns safety, not through lectures, but through the steady rhythm of a caregiver's voice, the gentle ritual of bedtime, the predictability of a story read again and again. Repetition soothes, sameness reassures. Society extends this principle into adulthood. We dress the day in routine and the conversation in familiar phrases. The morning greeting, the office banter, the take care at the door, these are lullabies humming beneath the traffic. They do not say everything that is true. They say just enough to keep the collective heart beating evenly. There is a biological wisdom in this. The body loves patterns because patterns can be predicted. And what can be predicted feels safer than what cannot. When we gather, our breathing tends to synchronize. Our gestures echo each other. Our emotions catch like fire on dry grass. We are porous creatures. The surface rituals, polite laughter, the social smile, the tidy answer are ways of placing a thin membrane over that porosity so that we do not drown in each other all the time. It is not that depth is bad. It is that unfiltered depth, everywhere and always, would be unlivable. Rituals do this work elegantly. Think of a meal that begins with a simple thanks, or a meeting that opens with a few moments of silence. Even in their most secular forms, rituals mark the threshold between chaos and order. They say, let us be with each other, but gently. A society without such thresholds would be forever stumbling into the sharp edges of truth. And while sharpness has its place, no one can press their hand to a blade all day and still hold a cup of water in the evening. The truce of surfaces is not a denial of reality, it is the art of pacing our contact with it. Notice also the kindness embedded here. Many people are carrying more than they can say. The tidy, I'm fine, is sometimes a way of protecting the other person from a deluge they are not prepared to wade through. We take turns being the one who needs and the one who cannot give. The surface allows the dance to continue without either partner collapsing. From the outside it may look like pretense, but from within it is a mercy. A soft cloth laid over a wound until there is time and space to tend it properly. Of course, this cloth can be misused. Surfaces can harden into masks, masks into armor, armor into forgetting. Yet even then, the original impulse was not inherently crooked. It was an attempt to make life livable in company. Imagine a world in which every passerby told you exactly what kept them awake at 3 a.m. in the full voltage of their feeling, every time you met them on the street. The truth might be rich, but the town would soon be in pieces. We cannot be each other's midnight every hour of the day. So when your clarity chafes at small talk and polite fictions, remember what they are holding back. A floodgate is not an insult to the river. It is how a village survives the spring. The trick, then, is not to sneer at the surface, nor to be trapped by it, but to see its function and its limits with equal tenderness. The beautiful sleep most people inhabit is not merely laziness of spirit. It is a blanket against the cold. Wakefulness without a blanket becomes cruelty. Sleep without the possibility of waking becomes its own kind of nightmare. Here is the delicate balance. A culture needs both the dream and the dreamer who can wake within the dream. The dream provides coherence. The awakened presence provides freshness. One keeps the heart from racing. The other keeps the soul from stagnating. When you see too clearly, you become sensitive to how the blanket sometimes smothers. But if you rip it away on a winter's night, you do not offer enlightenment, you offer frostbite. Wisdom enters by adjusting the covers rather than tearing them off. Therefore, let us grant the surface its dignity. It is the foyer, not the prison. It is the greeting, not the conversation. It is the exhale before the deeper breath. When you understand this, your seeing becomes less accusatory and more compassionate. You stop trying to abolish the lobby, and instead you become attentive to the moment when it is kind to invite someone further in. And sometimes it is kinder still to remain there with them for a while, sharing the gentle hush where nothing heavy needs to happen just yet. The first cost, and perhaps the most bewildering, is isolation. I don't mean the ordinary variety, the kind solved by adding a few more names to your phone or scheduling an extra dinner or two. I mean a solitude of a different order, the loneliness of dwelling in a reality adjacent to the one most people inhabit. You are speaking a dialect that few understand, even though it is composed of the same words. You are watching the same scenes, yet a second soundtrack is playing in your ears, a faint but undeniable music that others insist they cannot hear. It begins subtly. You notice your timing goes off in conversations. A friend delivers a cheerful report of their week, and the corners of your attention tug towards something unspoken that sits behind their eyes. You hesitate, feeling the weight of what you could acknowledge and the ease of what you're expected to affirm. You choose the easy path, that sounds great, and feel a small fracture appear inside, a hairline crack between what you know and what you are allowed to say. Repeat this 100 times, 1,000, and the distance between your inner room and the common hallway becomes a canyon. You can still cross it, but it takes effort, and the return journey leaves you oddly breathless. I once knew a woman, let us call her Sarah, who carried this capacity like a finely tuned instrument. She would enter a room and within moments sense who was performing and who was present, who was aching and who had simply learned to smile more efficiently. She could tell with uncanny accuracy when an apology was genuine and when it was a strategic truce. None of this made her unkind. If anything, it made her exquisitely gentle. But it made other people uncomfortable, not because she exposed them aloud, but because around her their masks felt heavy, unnecessary, almost theatrical. Something in them longed to breathe. Something in them feared what would happen if they did. At first the feedback was polite. "You're intense," they would say. "You think too much. You always read into things." These phrases are the velvet ropes of social life. They do not throw you out. They simply keep you at the entrance. Later the velvet becomes wire. Invitations slow. Conversations remain on the pavement. People reassure her and themselves that she is lovely, truly, just a bit much for everyday use. And what is she to do? She cannot unknow what she knows without dimming the very light that lets her love honestly. So she keeps the light and loses, bit by bit, the rooms in which she can turn it on. This is the isolation I mean, not merely fewer companions, but fewer places where your being fits. The world has many parties, many offices, many gatherings. It has fewer sanctuaries where the undercurrent is permitted to speak. You find yourself retreating to the margins, not out of disdain, but out of self-preservation. In busy cafes, you sit with your back to the wall, letting the river of feeling move past without constantly stepping into it. In meetings, you weigh the cost of naming the pressure. Nobody will admit against the cost of staying quiet and carrying it home in your chest. Most days you carry it home. The mind tries to bargain with this reality. Perhaps, it says, you could learn to go blind on demand. Only for an hour, only for this dinner, only for the sake of being easy to love. But clear seeing is not a hobby you take up and put down. It is akin to hearing. You can close your eyes at will, yet your ears go on. The attempt to not notice becomes a peculiar strain, like holding your breath in a room where everyone else is breathing freely. You can do it for a while, then the body, loyal to truth, taps you from the inside. You gasp without sound and wonder why you are tired. There is another layer to this loneliness. It is not just that others fail to share your perception. It is that they live at peace in a story you can no longer inhabit. The stage play moves on. The applause rises and falls. You stand in the aisle, aware of the scaffolding, the lights, the painted sky. You could sit, you could pretend. But the seat now presses into you the way a shoe presses against the wrong foot. None of this makes you superior. It simply makes you misfit in the original sense of the word, not fitted to the surrounding shape. And yet, be careful here. Isolation can harden into bitterness, and bitterness is merely a mask carved from disappointment. If you decide that people are shallow and the world is an elaborate fraud, you have only built a new theater where you alone play every part. The point is not to hate the dream because you have learned to wake within it. The point is to carry your wakefulness without scorn. But this nuance is difficult to maintain when the cost is paid in the coin of companionship. Even kindness begins to sting when it is offered only up to the boundary where truth would begin. So you fashion small rituals to remain whole. You take walks without conversation so that the room of your being can return to its original order after the furniture has been shifted by a dozen unspoken histories. You let music wash the day out of your skin. You sit by water because water, unlike people, does not insist on a simpler version of events. The solitude is not empty. It is the workshop where you reassemble your sense of self from the pieces that social weather tries to scatter. In this quiet, you discover that isolation and aloneness are not synonyms. Isolation is imposed. Aloneness is chosen. The first withers you. The second roots you. To survive the first, you must learn the art of the second. And still, the paradox remains. The clearer you perceive, the more deeply you love what you perceive. That is the cruel tenderness of it. You see the fear beneath the bravado and your heart softens. You see the tiredness under the smile and you want to set down the mask for them, gently, without shame. But love, without the conditions that make it receivable, can feel to others like exposure. So you learn, slowly, that loving truly sometimes means stepping back, not because you have withdrawn your care, but because you refuse to purchase connection at the price of pretending not to see. This is the first danger, then. The thin air of a high altitude where few keep you company. It does not mean you are wrong to climb. It means you must learn to breathe differently. And that is a skill we will need, again and again, as we face the next choice that clarity demands. Clarity ushers you to a threshold where every door exacts a toll. On one side is the door of speech, on the other, the door of silence. Step through either without awareness, and you will pay more than the moment is worth. When you speak, you disturb the surface, not with accusation, perhaps, not with drama, only with a simple sentence that refuses to bend. Yet even the gentlest truth creates ripples in a pond kept still by collective agreement. You say, something feels off here, and chairs scrape imperceptibly on the floor, smiles become careful, people reach for words like shields. You haven't wounded anyone, you have merely removed the anesthetic. But the body, roused mid-surgery, thrashes. In such moments, the backlash rarely arrives as reasoned argument. It comes as heat without light, defensiveness, reframing, laughter with tight edges, the swift paste-on label, negative, overthinking, too sensitive, understand the mechanics at play. A group maintains its story the way a tent stays up by the steady pull of many ropes. Your sentence loosens one. The mind that depends on the tent for shelter feels the draft and moves quickly to retie the knot. This is why your words are often treated as the problem rather than the weather you are naming. If the messenger can be made suspect, the message can be postponed indefinitely. Nobody needs to look at the sky if they can keep glancing at you. I remember a meeting, perhaps you know the kind, where the room congratulated itself on a project that smiled handsomely in the slides while sagging at the joints invisible to the slides. The enthusiasm had that lacquered sheen that resists fingerprints. Questions were invited the way a museum invites touch, in theory. I spoke softly, not to scold, but to inquire. Before we celebrate, could we examine the pattern around missed deadlines and the reluctance to acknowledge blockers? Silent. Then the air filled with a sweet smoke, reassurances, phrases like learning curve, early days, great momentum. None of these addressed the fracture. They perfumed it. I did not receive counter-evidence. I received a mood, as if the mere existence of my noticing were a threat to be neutralized. Over the following weeks, I found myself skipped from certain threads, added late to others, and thanked lavishly for bringing passion, which is what you say when you cannot thank someone for bringing sight. This is the tax on speech. You will often be asked to pay it in the currency of your reputation. And let us be honest, sometimes you will not deliver the truth cleanly. Clarity does not guarantee perfect timing or perfect tone. You will misjudge a moment, you will speak from fatigue, you will forget to breathe and sound sharper than the love in your chest. But even when you deliver the truth with the tenderness of a hand placing a glass of water on a table, it may be knocked to the floor merely because it is water, and some preferred the dream of wine. Very well, then keep silent. Close the other door. Hold your seeing inside like a candle cupped against the wind. This too has a price. Each time you swallow a perception you know to be accurate, you take a small bite out of your own trust. You don't mean to, after all. You are being practical, kind, strategic. But the body keeps the minutes. It writes in a quiet ledger, on this date we knew X and pretended not to. On this date we felt Y and called it nothing. On this date we watched the mask replace the face and applauded the mask. Over time, the debt accumulates. The next time you need your discernment quickly, when the stakes are personal, when danger is intimate, you may find that you have trained yourself to hesitate, to second guess, to look outward for permission to know what you already know. This is how silence divides you. Part of you stands at the window, telling the truth to the night. Another part entertains guests in the living room, making sure no one glances down the hall. You become a good host to your own self-betrayal. You smile to keep the evening pleasant while the house fills with the faint smell of something burning. Eventually, the contradiction becomes a fatigue no rest seems to cure. It is not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. It is the exhaustion of carrying a secret. You never wanted the secret of your own vision. There is also the subtle corrosion of self-respect. We are taught to be easy, to be agreeable, to let small things pass for the sake of harmony. But harmony that requires you to doubt your own senses is not harmony. It is a choir that keeps time by ignoring the metronome. If you live there too long, you begin to speak to yourself in the tone others used. You're too much. You're making it up. Be normal. This is not humility. This is gaslighting rehearsed until it sounds like your own voice. So what to do? The answer is not a crude rule, always speak, or never. Wisdom is a third door built by practice, the door of skillful timing. Sometimes you name the thing precisely and briefly, and then you stop, like tapping a tuning fork in a room to hear what resonates and what recoils. Sometimes you ask a question that lets others arrive at the truth without feeling pushed across the threshold. Sometimes you remain silent in the room and write the truth elsewhere in your journal, in a plan, in a boundary. You enact quietly the next morning. Speech and silence are instruments. The music depends on the hand that plays them. What matters is that you never abandon your own companionship. Speak without leaving yourself. Be silent without leaving yourself. If you choose to speak and the room turns cold, meet yourself later with warmth. If you choose silence and the ledger in your chest begins to tally, meet yourself with honesty and make a corrective act soon. A conversation with someone who can hear, a decision that realigns the inner and the outer, a small refusal that tells your nervous system, I'm with you. In this way, you teach the body that, whether the world applauds or frowns, you will not be the one who deserts you. The price cannot be eliminated, but it can be sanctified. When you pay it consciously, it becomes the cost of integrity rather than the penalty for being inconvenient. And integrity, while often lonely at the register, buys you something nothing else can: the quiet knowledge that your mouth and your heart still belong to the same person. If isolation is the thin air, then this next danger is the gust that can knock you from the ridge. When you see clearly in a room that prefers its gentle mist, the room will often decide that the real problem is not the weather you are pointing to, but the barometer you have become. This, in essence, is shooting the messenger. A pattern as old as kings. Punish the runner for the contents of the letter, and for a brief, superstitious moment, the bad news seems less real. The dynamic is simple. A group maintains its equilibrium by telling a story about itself. We are fine, we are progressing, we are kind, we are competent. Your perception introduces a footnote that complicates the text. Not a condemnation, merely an amendment, yes, and also, but to a system organized around comfort, the also feels like a tremor under the floorboards. And so the energy that might have examined the foundation is redirected toward the source of the tremor, you. Observe the labels that arrive with remarkable speed. Too negative, creating drama, unstable, paranoid, can't let things be. Each functions like a tiny spell. Rather than test the perception against reality, the group reclassifies the perceiver. The brilliance of this maneuver is that it appears to resolve something. After all, once you have named the person the problem, you can file them in a drawer and return the room to its prior temperature. The tent flaps stop whispering. The story resumes. There is another subtler variant. Praise as neutralizer. We so appreciate your passion. Your sensitivity is a gift. Love your energy. None of this meets the content. It embalms your perception in compliment, like placing flowers on a leak in the hull. The ship smells nicer and continues taking on water. You, smelling the bouquet, may briefly doubt yourself. Perhaps it was just passion. Perhaps there was no leak. But the ocean, indifferent to compliments, keeps rising. Why does this happen? Because seeing clearly threatens not just comfort but identity. Roles depend on lighting. If you draw attention to the glare, the role itself feels endangered. The supportive colleague cannot easily acknowledge their silence around harm. The visionary leader struggles to admit that the plan is fraying at the edges. The happy family resists the possibility that happiness has been purchased on layaway from the truth. When a role is imperiled, the person wearing it reaches instinctively for defense. Not a considered defense, an animal one. Projection, minimization, mirth with a blade hidden in it. The ancient tools. Think of the parable of the emperor with no clothes. We often tell it as a triumph of truth. Some brave child blurts out the obvious, and everyone wakes at once. In practice, crowds seldom thank the child. First they hush him for rudeness. Then they question his motives. Then they propose that perhaps the finest garments are invisible to the immature. Only after some independent crisis, the wind lifts a royal hem, the emperor shivers, does the story revise itself. And even then, notice how memory is curated. We always knew something was off, they will say later, awarding themselves retroactive courage. The cost to you is real. Repeated mislabeling is not a surface irritation. It is a solvent that, drop by drop, can thin your faith in your own instrument. If enough people insist that the light on your dashboard is a decorative feature, you may one day drive past the last safe exit. This is why scapegoating is so efficient. It not only protects the group's dream, it tempts the dreamer who sees to dream against himself. Now, there is a temptation here to become the opposite of what wounded you, to make a hobby of pronouncement, to relish the role of the one who tells it like it is, to cultivate a posture of permanent revelation. But preaching is merely another costume, and one just as binding. When you grow attached to being the only awake person in a sleeping town, you have not escaped the play, you have taken a more dramatic part. The show goes on, and you must keep the volume up to be heard over your own echo. What, then, to remember in the moment of being shot for carrying the letter? First, that the arc of truth is often longer than the room's patient. Most systems do not pivot because a sentence was tidy. They pivot because reality applies its pressure until even the careful develop a bruise. Second, the labels tell you more about the room's fear than about your seeing. Too sensitive usually means too accurate to ignore without effort. Creating drama often means narrating the conflict we cannot yet afford to acknowledge. Hear these translations quietly. They keep your compass calibrated. Above all, Do not join the prosecution, neither theirs of you nor yours of them. If you accept their verdict, you will grow timid where you must remain alive. If you condemn them, you will grow hard where you must remain porous. The art is to stay in contact with what you know without making an enemy of those who cannot yet bear it. You are not required to be the hero, nor to accept the role of villain. You are permitted to be a witness, clear, kind, unwilling to lie. In time, something shifts. Perhaps a consequence arrives that no one can explain away. Perhaps a person quietly circles back and asks about what you said, then can we talk? You do not gloat. You do not keep score. You simply step out of the line of fire and, if invited, read the letter again, this time with everyone willing to hear that it was never about you. It was always about the weather. There is a subtler hazard that arrives not as accusation from others, but as erosion from within. When you see clearly and feel just as clearly, you begin to absorb the weather you read. Walk into a room serene, leave carrying a storm that isn't yours. Sit across from a friend and find your chest tightening on their behalf, though they speak only of weekend plans. Spend a day among people who are smiling and discover hours later that your jaw aches from holding their smile for them. This is what happens when the membrane between you and the world thins. The self becomes a shoreline, and other people's tides keep remapping it. At first you hardly notice. A mood lingers after lunch. A heaviness you cannot source descends mid-afternoon. You chalk it up to poor sleep, to too much coffee, to the weather, but then patterns appear. Calm houses you, and you feel calm. Frantic rooms open like a trapdoor beneath your feet. It is not empathy in the noble sense, an active, chosen entering. It is osmosis. You are a sponge left in a basin. The water rises whether or not you meant to soak. Without a boundary, perception becomes possession, not of things, but of states. You begin to carry inventories that don't belong on your shelves. The colleague's dread about a presentation, the stranger's sorrow from a phone call you overheard, the bus driver's fatigue, the barista's quiet rage at something that happened before dawn. You do not know what to do with these items, and so they stack on counters, in hallways, in the room where you once kept your own feelings tidy. Eventually you trip over them in the dark and think you are clumsy. In truth, you have been a generous warehouse, unguarded. There is a cost to this generosity. The inner compass, once quick to settle, begins to spin. Is this sadness mine, you ask? And the needle wobbles. Is this fear my warning or someone else's echo? The questions multiply until even delight is second-guessed. Do I truly love this, or am I mirroring the joy across the table? Living like this is like trying to hear your voice in a crowded station. You can pick out the consonants, but you cannot be sure of the words. In time, you forget your natural pitch. When the pitch is forgotten, choices suffer. You say yes because the room is surging yes, and later find that the river carried you far from your bank. You say no because a throb of no has filled the building, and later discover it wasn't yours to refuse. You rest and wake tired. You work and feel hollow. You mistake absorption for compassion and depletion for service. People may praise your sensitivity even as you silently sink. Let us be plain. Compassion is not the same as contagion. To sit with another's pain is not to wear their skin. To understand a room's fear is not to enter it unarmored. The heart was made to be open. It was also made with a door. A door is not a wall, it swings. It allows passage in both directions and can be closed when night falls. The door's purpose is not rejection, it is rhythm. Without rhythm, even music becomes noise. So how does one thicken the membrane without hardening the heart? Begin by noticing the exact moment your body tilts. Everyone has a tell. The breath goes shallow, the shoulders float, the eyes glaze while continuing to make contact. Mark that moment as a threshold. You do not need a technique in public. You need a sentence inside that says, this is the edge. Edges do not shout, they clarify. With practice, you will feel the difference between listening and leaking, between holding space and being flooded by it. Then give your nervous system rooms of its own. Solitude is not a luxury for the overly sensitive. It is the maintenance schedule of a well-used instrument. Step away from the orchestra so that your strings can release other people's music. Water helps its constancy, its refusal to hurry on your behalf. So does stillness, which is water in another element. Silence is not the absence of care. It is the place care goes to become clean again. There is also the matter of ownership. When an unaccountable feeling lands, ask it quietly whose it is. Not analytically, musically. You will hear a timbre, a signature. Sometimes it will be yours. If so, take it in, sit beside it. Let it teach you your own depth. Sometimes it will hum with a frequency that is simply not your instrument. Then, with the same kindness you would extend to a child returning a borrowed coat, you can say inwardly, this is not mine to keep. The coat does not need to be burned. It needs to go home. Remember, boundaries are not the refusal of love. They are the form that allows love to remain love rather than compulsion. Without them, you will try to heal by swallowing. You will offer presence that is secretly a plea for relief. You will mix your breath with the rooms and call the dizziness devotion. The clearer way is quieter. You stand where you are, door open, door capable of closing, and you let the world be the world without dimming your lamp to match its weather. In time, you will rediscover your pitch. It is simpler than you remembered. Not a performance, not a sermon, just the note you hum when no one is listening. When you can hear that note, even in a crowded station, the tides still come and go, but they no longer redraw the map. The shoreline learns its name again, and with it the power to welcome the sea and to remain the shore. There is a phrase much abused in spiritual circles, detach. People hear it and imagine an ice house where nothing melts. But the detachment of wisdom is not frost, it is clear air. It is the art of standing close enough to feel the warmth of the fire and far enough not to catch flame every time a spark jumps. The mistake is to think you must choose between burning with everyone or leaving the campsite altogether. There is a middle way, a boundaried presence that says, I will be here with you and I will also be here with myself. Conscious distance begins in the simplest place, posture. Not the posture of shoulders and spine, though those matter, but the posture of attention. When you tilt entirely into another's field, your awareness slides out of your own body and hovers over their horizon. The world narrows to their weather, and soon you are soaked by rain that never fell on your land. Boundaried presence remembers to keep a candle lit at home. As you listen, you let a small part of your attention remain in your breath, in the sensations of your hands, in the feel of your feet on the ground. Not to retreat, to remain. It's astonishing how much kindness grows when you refuse to evacuate yourself. Notice what this does to time. Without a boundary, urgency in the room becomes your metronome. You rush because someone else is rushing. You decide because someone else cannot bear not deciding. With conscious distance, time regains its elasticity. You hear the hurried drum without marching to it. You can say, I understand the pressure. Shall we wait an hour? Or let's sleep and look again in the morning. And you can mean it without passive aggression. A boundary is a guardian of patience. It keeps your hands from rearranging furniture that is not yours to move. Boundaried presence also changes the flavor of empathy. Empathy without a door tends to lean forward, offering solutions before the sap can rise. Empathy with a door leans back slightly. Not away, but into a wider trust. You can say, I see your pain, and leave the sentence there, air around it, confidence around it, the kind that suggests the person's own life is a competent river. Rivers do not need rescuers as often as they need room to run. Your task becomes less about carrying them and more about walking the bank, keeping pace without grabbing the helm. This is not indifference. Indifference is brittle. It snaps at the hint of demand. Conscious distance is supple. It bends to meet the moment and springs back to its shape afterward. In practice, it might look like listening fully and then saying, I can help with this part, the rest is yours. Or, I care deeply and I'm not able to take this on. Or even, I will sit with you while nothing is done, and that will be our work for now. These sentences, spoken without apology, are bridges. They teach both sides how to meet without trespass. There is courage in this way of being, because it refuses the narcotic of feeling indispensable. Many who see clearly develop a secret addiction to usefulness, to be the one who notices, who mends, who anticipates. This becomes identity, a way to justify the cost of sensitivity by making it pay for everyone's ticket. But usefulness is a poor altar. It demands endless offerings and gives little back. Boundaried presence steps down from that priesthood. It says, I will be of service when service is clean. I will not purchase belonging with labor or trade my center for applause. If praise arrives, fine. If it does not, the candle is still lit at home. Conscious distance also dignifies the other person's path. When you no longer need them to change, to soothe your nerves, you become a safer companion. People can feel the difference between being understood and being managed. One relaxes the spine, the other raises the guard. Boundaries tell the nervous system, no one is about to rearrange you. In that safety, truths speak up of their own accord. Paradoxically, the less you push, the more reality joins the conversation. All of this depends on returning again and again to a gentleness with yourself. Boundaries maintained by fear grow sharp, they cut the hand that sets them. Boundaries maintained by care grow round, they are clear without being cruel. When you feel your door slam, ask what you are protecting that could be guarded more kindly. When you feel your door hanging open in a storm, ask what you are offering that was never requested. And if you discover you have been living on the porch, neither inside nor out, forgive the habit. Many of us were taught that love means staying at the threshold, ready to sprint at the first cry. You can step in, you can sit down, you can trust that you will hear what is truly yours to hear. In the end, boundaried presence is nothing exotic. It is the simple, steady practice of letting two truths coexist. I am with you, and I am with myself. From that place, the world is easier to love because you are not trying to swallow it whole. The theater can go on, as it will, and you can enjoy the parts that are beautiful, endure the parts that are clumsy, and quietly refuse the invitations that ask you to leave your seat and play a role you did not audition for. You are allowed to savor a line and also see the stage lights. You are allowed to hold a hand and keep your own pulse. Stand here, then, in the clear air between closeness and collapse. Let it be enough to be present and intact. Watch how the room softens when it learns you will not force it to wake nor agree to go back to sleep. This is the grace of conscious distance. It does not end the dream. It lets the dream breathe until waking can arrive by itself. There is a moment in the path of clear seeing when the hand that once flew to fix begins, at last, to rest upon the knee. Not from apathy, but from understanding. You realize that sight is not a summons. Awareness does not draft you into an army. It introduces you to reality and then leaves you free. The freedom is frightening at first because the mind has practiced for years the reflex of rescue. Notice, conclude, intervene. But the more intimately you study the mechanics of change, the more you discover that compulsion rarely assists it. In fact, compulsion is often the silt that keeps the river cloudy. Imagine again that river you pass each morning. Today its water runs brown with sediment after a night of rain. You can see the pebbles only a few inches below the surface. The rest is a murk of motion. You could leap in with buckets and sieves. You could dash about proclaiming a project. We must clarify this at once. And in your enthusiasm, you would do precisely what the river itself is already doing, stirring. Or you could step back, mark the banks with a quiet mind, and let gravity and time do their millennia-old work. Sun warms, the current settles, the particles fall. In an hour, a day, a week, depending on the storm clarity, returns of its own accord. The river does not require your agitation. It requires your patience. This is not passivity. It is partnership with conditions. So much of our suffering around other people's fog arises from the fantasy that clarity can be inserted from the outside like a spare part. But insight is organic. It grows when a life has accumulated enough warmth and pressure to crack the shell from within. You may rap gently at the shell. You may sit nearby humming the music that reminds the chick it is not alone. But if you prise it open too soon, you do not deliver the bird into flight, you deliver it into harm. Timing is a mercy, and timing belongs most often to the one who must change. Paradoxically, as you relax the compulsion to fix, your perception grows more lucid. Why? Because the nervous system is no longer straining toward an outcome. An agenda, however noble, creates static in the signal. When you need someone to see what you see, your listening subtly narrows to the lines that support your thesis. When you are willing to let them be exactly where they are, every frequency returns. You become available to the whole weather, not only to the forecast you prefer. Others feel this. They may not name it, but the body recognizes the difference between being gazed upon and being grasped. Think of the figures in your life who have allowed you to unfold without hurrying you. A teacher who didn't jam the answer into your mouth but waited with a question that kept tasting sweet a week later. A friend who didn't confiscate your grief but sat at the edge of it with a thermos and 2 cups. Around such people, the breath lengthens. One feels less like a problem to be solved and more like a landscape to be seen. And in that being seen without pressure, things begin to move of their own accord. Not always quickly, not always visibly, but truly. Let me say this plainly. Your job is not to stop every leak, rewire every house, or serve as lifeguard to every swimmer who wanders too close to the deep end. Your job is to keep your lamp lit and your door in good repair so that when someone is ready for light or shelter, they can find it without confusion. There is a discipline here, a discipline of not interrupting another person's conversation with reality. If consequence is the teacher that will finally be heard, let the lesson proceed. This is not cruelty, it is respect. To stand between a life and its feedback is to keep that life infant. Love must sometimes step aside so that truth can finish its sentence. But what of harm, you ask? What of the moment where non-interference is complicity? The point of non-intervening wisdom is not to abandon conscience. It is to anchor it. When genuine danger arises, the body knows the clean urgency, the bell with no echo. You act then without the throb of ego, because action is simply what love looks like under those conditions. The practice we are speaking of is for the infinite remainder of circumstances that trigger you not because there is mortal peril, but because uncertainty is intolerable. In those cases, the intervention serves your anxiety more than their awakening. Recognizing this saves everyone time. There is another gift in letting be. You are no longer bargaining with the world for your own inner peace. So long as your nervous system requires other people to behave for you to be calm, you will be a very skilled but very tired puppeteer. Strings everywhere, music nowhere. When you return the strings, one by one, you will feel 2 things: terror at first, as if the stage will collapse without your choreography, and then relief, as the show finds its own rhythm. You discover that serenity is native, not negotiated. It does not depend on universal compliance. It depends on your willingness to live in a room where not everything is arranged to your liking and to remain intact anyway. Curiously, the world becomes easier to help from this place. Because you are not darting about with a net, you can see where help would actually help. The gesture becomes smaller, cleaner. A sentence offered and then left to breathe, a boundary quietly moved to where it should have been all along, an invitation extended with no grip on the wrist. Your yes acquires weight because your no has learned to stand. People trust the hand that is not shaking from the need to be accepted. The muddy river teaches one more lesson. It reminds us that clarity is not a trophy you win and mount on the wall. It is a condition that arises and subsides. Rains come, banks crumble. Upstream, someone stirs the bed with good intention. The water clouds again. This is not failure, it is flow. If you make an identity out of transparency, you will spend your days enraged at the weather. If you make a practice out of returning to stillness, to breath, to the bank where you can watch without drowning, then clarity will visit as often as the season allows, and you will meet it like an old friend rather than a god you must coerce. In the end, the paradox resolves into a simple posture. Eyes open, hands relaxed. See what you see. Tell the truth you are asked for. Tend what is yours. Let the rest be river. Not because you don't care, but because you do enough to trust that life, like water, clears best when given the room and the time to settle. After all this, you might wonder who is destined to be undone by their seeing and who might be deepened by it. The ones who suffer most are not those who perceive the most. They are those who keep no house for what they perceive. They become public squares for every passing weather. They make a religion of rescue to justify the noise inside. They swallow whole rooms and call it empathy, then wake each morning with a hangover of borrowed feelings. To such souls, clarity turns punitive, like a spotlight that never dims. They are sincere, yes, but sincerity is not the same as stewardship. Without stewardship, even gifts become burdens. The ones who thrive have learned a humbler art. They place a chair at the center of their being and visit it daily. It is a small chair, nothing ceremonial, but it is theirs. They sit there not to withdraw from life, but to rejoin it without being dispersed by it. Solitude, for them, is not a mood, it is a maintenance ritual. 10 minutes by a window, a walk that belongs to no purpose, a notebook where truths can land before they are tasked with changing the world. In such spaces, perception rinses itself. The sediments of other lives settle to the bottom, and what is truly one's own becomes visible again, as simple as a pebble in clear water. This is how trust in perception is born, not by making it a tyrant, but by letting it be verified in the quiet. You learn to test what you see the way a craftsman tests wood, by touch, by listening for the note when knuckle meets grain. Is this my sorrow or the sorrow of the room? Tap, listen. Is this a boundary I must speak or a patience I must practice? Tap, listen. You will not always be right. There is no shame in that. The ethical point is not to be inerrant, but to be in relationship with your instruments so that you can recalibrate when you are off. And here is an unexpected mercy. As you stop forcing your seeing outward, life begins to offer you the conversations you had been chasing. People find their way to your table when they are ready to sit. They arrive with the kinds of questions that do not require you to shout across a room. You discover that truth spoken at the right distance and the right time sounds less like a verdict and more like a bell. It doesn't argue, it rings. Those who are listening turn their heads. Those who are not yet ready continue on, and you no longer feel compelled to run after them, jingling a handful of bells. Patience, then, becomes more than a virtue. It is a cosmology. Change does not move by our clock. A life is a long conversation between a person and the things that refuse to leave them alone. You may see clearly today what another will only be able to greet next year, or in the final week of their earthly calendar. Let that be all right. To demand that consciousness sprint is to confuse sunlight with a spotlight. Sunlight arrives by degrees. It has the courtesy to let the eyes adjust. Still, do not mistake patience for postponement where action is clean. There will be times your clarity meets a moment that is ripe. Then the boundary is a gate, not a wall. You speak, you move a chair, you end the meeting. That will not tell the truth. You decline the invitation that asks you to leave yourself at home. You act not to prove that you see, but because the seeing has ripened into a deed. Afterwards you return to the chair at the center, not to rehearse your heroics, but to rinse the day and be ordinary again. The soul cannot live forever on mountaintops. It needs the kitchen, the sink, the small steaming bowl of enough. And because life is kind in its timing, you will, sooner or later, meet others who carry this odd lamp. Sometimes you recognize each other by what you do not do. You don't flinch from silences. You don't pry at tender places for the thrill of being first to name them. You don't mistake performance for presence. Conversation with such people feels like walking beside a river at dusk. There is movement, but no hurry. You find yourselves telling the truth without effort, laughing without calculation, disagreeing without threat. It is not that you agree on everything, it is that the agreement isn't the point. The point is that both lamps stay lit while you talk. In this company, the wound of earlier rooms begins to close. You realize you were not impossible to love. You were simply expensive for the wrong currency. You were paid in comfort when you needed courage, in flattery when you needed fidelity. Among your people, the economy is different. They pay with attention, they pay with their own willingness to be changed by what is real. You do the same. No one is the hero, no one is the fool. You meet as travelers who have chosen to remain awake on a night train that passes through sleeping cities. From here, the old images return with a softer light. The theater is still the theater. The masks are still useful. The party still needs small talk to keep the floor from collapsing into confession. But you are no longer tearing at the curtains, nor are you pretending the lights of the sun. You can enjoy the play and still see the rigging. You can move between lobby and stage and street without losing the thread of your own breath. When the room grows foggy, you do not shout. You wait by the window. When the river runs brown, you do not leap in with buckets. You stroll the bank and wave to the water you trust. And on certain mornings, rare but recognizable, you will wake before the clock and step outside to find the world in that first generous half-light. The city is still mostly asleep. A few windows glow. Birds rehearse a motif and then forget it, mid-phrase. The air is clean with possibility. This is the hour that resembles your task. Not to jar the sleeping with a trumpet, not to scold the dreamers for dreaming, but to stand in the growing light, lamp in hand, and be ready. Ready for whoever stirs and steps out, blinking, asking quietly, "Is it morning?" You will nod, perhaps pour coffee, perhaps say nothing at all. Dawn does not need an argument. It needs a horizon. So let the horizon be your companion. See fully, carry lightly, pace kindly. Give your solitude the respect of a daily chair. Give your perception the trust of patient testing. Give your companions the dignity of their own timing. And give yourself permission, at last, to live with eyes open in a world that often prefers them closed open and unafraid, open and at peace. The danger is real, as we have said, but so is the possibility that you learn to be conscious without being consumed, to love without drowning, to speak without abandoning yourself, and to be simply and steadily a lamp that does not demand the room go bright to keep burning.